Darius Washington was 41 years old when a man pointed a loaded .45 caliber pistol directly at his chest and ordered him to leave. The man was standing in front of Darius's wife, in a luxury condo that wasn't his, expecting a devastated husband to flinch, back down, and disappear. What he got instead was silence. And then a laugh. Not nervous, not disbelieving. The slow, genuine laugh of a man who had just been handed exactly what he needed. Because Brett Calloway had made one catastrophic miscalculation. He had spent months sleeping with another man's wife, stealing from another man's business, and building a plan he believed was airtight. He had profiled Darius Washington as quiet, overlooked, safe to destroy. He had no idea that the man standing calmly in front of that gun barrel had spent 12 years as a naval special warfare operator. What happened in the next 2 seconds, Brett never saw coming. And what Darius set in motion after that, Brett would never recover from. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The pull-up bar was cold at 7 in the morning. Darius Washington didn't mind. He gripped the steel, breathed out, and pulled. His body rose and fell with the kind of easy rhythm that had nothing to do with effort. 41 years old, and his body still remembered every single thing the Navy had put it through. Some mornings that felt like a burden. Most mornings, it felt like a gift. The Cascade Heights neighborhood was waking up slow around him. A lawnmower 2 houses down. The smell of someone's charcoal catching early. A kid on a bike rolling past the gate at the end of the driveway, not noticing the man moving in the backyard with the quiet focus of someone who had once done this in the dark, in foreign countries, for reasons he still couldn't talk about at dinner parties. He did 25 more reps. Then he dropped to the grass, stood straight, and looked at the deck he'd built with his own hands 3 summers ago. Patricia had wanted one. He'd spent 4 weekends measuring, cutting, and hammering it into existence. Not because he had to, not because he was trying to prove something, because she wanted it. That was the whole reason. That was usually the whole reason. Darius Washington was not a complicated man, though people sometimes mistook him for one. He ran Washington Tactical Group out of a clean, well-organized office in downtown Atlanta, 3 days a week there, 2 days working from the study at the back of the house. The firm handled security consulting for government contracts and private sector clients, and it had grown from a one-man operation into a 12-person team through nothing but reputation and results. He drove a 7-year-old truck. He didn't own a boat or a vacation property. He wore the same style of plain, well-fitted clothes he'd been wearing since he got out of the service. He had been a Navy SEAL for 12 years. He did not talk about this at dinner parties either. The thing people noticed about Darius first was the stillness, not coldness. He was warm with people he trusted, easy to laugh, genuinely interested in other people's lives. But there was a quality underneath all of that, something settled and quiet and impossible to rattle, that made strangers choose their words more carefully than they expected to. His men at the firm called him Stillwater. He'd heard them say it once and never acknowledged it, which they understood completely. He had married Patricia Holloway 8 years ago, and he loved her the way he did most things that mattered, without announcement, without performance, in the steady daily language of action. He had moved Washington Tactical Group's main office downtown when she found the Buckhead location for her spa. He had put up $60,000 in seed capital without blinking, and backed a personal guarantee loan on top of it. He had built the deck. He had learned which wine she preferred with which meals, and he stocked both without being asked. He was not a man who needed credit for any of it. He just needed it to mean what he thought it meant. Patricia came downstairs at 10:15. Darius was at the kitchen island with his second coffee. reviewing a contract proposal on his laptop. He looked up. She was dressed in a silk blouse he'd seen in a shopping bag 2 weeks ago, still creased from the fold. Dark trousers, heels that were not errand shoes. Her hair was done. Her earrings were the small gold ones she saved for evenings out. "I'm meeting a client," she said, picking up her keys from the hook by the door. "Might run a few errands after." She crossed to him and kissed his cheek. The perfume was the good one. "Okay," he said. She smiled. Bright. Easy. The smile she'd had since the day he met her. And then she was out the door. He heard her car start in the driveway, heard it back out and move down the street until there was nothing. He looked back at his laptop. He did not catastrophize. He was not built for it. What he was built for was observation, retention, and patience. And so he simply filed what he had seen the way he filed everything, clean and precise, in the part of his mind that kept records without being asked to. He spent the rest of the day working. Patricia came home at 6:40, vague about the afternoon. The client had run long. She'd grabbed food while she was out. She seemed fine, relaxed even. She changed out of the silk blouse and asked him something about his week. And he answered, and the evening moved the way evenings move in houses where two people are comfortable with each other. He washed the dishes. She watched something in the living room. He was drying a glass when he saw it on the kitchen counter. A phone. Not her regular phone, which was on the arm of the couch. A second phone, smaller, older model. Screen still lit. Unlocked. He set the glass down. He picked up the phone. Read the first message. Read the second. "Keep Darius calm through Q3. We can't have him looking at the account before the transfer clears." He set the phone back down. Exactly where it had been. Exactly the same angle. He walked to the garage and closed the door behind him. He sat down in the dark. The garage smelled like motor oil and dry concrete. Darius sat in the dark with his hands on his knees and did not move for a long time. He was not panicking. Panic was something that happened to people who hadn't been prepared for bad information. He had spent 12 years being handed bad information in bad places and learning to sit inside it without flinching. The training didn't leave. It just went quiet until you needed it. He ran the messages again in his mind, word for word, the way he'd been trained to hold intelligence, exact, unembellished, stripped of everything but what was actually there. Keep Darius calm through Q3. We can't have him looking at the account before the transfer clears. Not, "I miss you." Not, "When can I see you?" That was the part that mattered. That was the part he sat with in the dark until he understood its full shape. An affair he could have read in those messages and still recognized it as human. Weak, painful, human. People made that particular mistake all the time. But that was not what those words were. Those words were a schedule, a coordination, a we that had a plan attached to it. Someone had looked at his marriage and seen a timetable. He breathed in. He breathed out. He went back inside, washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and watched the last 20 minutes of whatever Patricia had on in the living room. When she said she was going to bed, he said he'd be up in a little while. She kissed him on the top of his head, on her way past. He did not sleep much. But he lay still the whole night. The days that followed were an exercise in a particular kind of discipline. Darius did not confront her. He did not ask questions she might remember later. He watched. He had spent years in environments where the wrong reaction got people killed, and he understood that the most dangerous thing he could do right now was let her know what he knew. Information was only useful as long as the other side didn't know you had it. Patricia was good. He had to give her that. She was warm in the mornings. She asked about his contracts, laughed at his stories, cooked on 2 nights she didn't have to. She was performing normal the way a professional performs it, from deep enough inside the role that it looked effortless. He watched her handle her regular phone with total ease. The second phone never reappeared on the counter. He noticed she checked it in the car. He could tell by the angle of her shoulder when she thought he wasn't looking out the window. He filed all of it. He said nothing. On the fourth day, he called Kevin. Kevin Osei picked up on the second ring, the way he always did. "I need you to run a name for me," Darius said. "Brett Calloway, Atlanta area. Real estate, I think." A short pause. Kevin didn't ask why. That was one of the things Darius valued most about him. He understood the difference between questions that helped and questions that just filled silence. "Give me a day," Kevin said. It took him 18 hours. Brett Calloway, 44 years old. Real estate developer operating out of a Buckhead office. Multiple LLCs registered across Fulton, Cobb, and DeKalb counties. One active luxury condo development in Sandy Springs. Inherited his initial capital base from his father's property portfolio, built on top of it with varying results. Married to Judith Calloway, 51, old Atlanta family money. Kevin read the summary over the phone in the flat, efficient tone of a man who had once briefed generals. "Anything else you need on him?" Kevin asked when he finished. "Not yet," Darius said. "I'll let you know." He ended the call and pulled up the Sandy Springs address on his laptop. The development was called the Marlowe, 16-story glass building, still under construction on its upper floors. Model units open on floors 3 and 4. The website had renderings of interiors that looked expensive and deliberately anonymous. He thought about the messages again, the account, the transfer. He thought about the silk blouse and the good perfume on a Saturday morning. He thought about 4 weekends with a measuring tape and a miter saw, building something with his hands because she wanted it. Then he stopped thinking about it and started watching. He confirmed the pattern in 3 days. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Patricia told him Tuesday she was visiting a supplier. Thursday was a client consultation. Saturday was errands. Each time she drove to the same address in Sandy Springs. Each time she stayed between 40 minutes and 2 hours. Each time she came home relaxed and easy, with a story at the ready. He watched her pull out of the driveway for the 4th time on a Thursday afternoon. He sat in his truck at the end of the block and watched her taillights disappear around the corner. He waited 5 minutes. Then he started the engine. He called no one. He drove alone. The Marlowe had no doorman on weekday afternoons. Darius walked in through the side entrance off the parking structure, the one that fed into the stairwell. A laminated sign on the door said, "Model Units, floors 3 and 4. Welcome." He took the stairs. Old habit. Elevators boxed you in and announced your arrival. Stairs gave you a few extra seconds of information before anyone knew you were there. His footsteps were quiet on the concrete. Not careful quiet, the kind that betrayed effort. Just quiet. The way he moved through every room he'd ever entered in a professional capacity. Present, unhurried, reading the space as he went. 4th floor. The stairwell door opened into a carpeted hallway that smelled like fresh paint and manufactured air. 4 unit doors, all closed except the one at the far end. That one stood open about 6 inches. Light inside. Voices. Low. He walked to it and pushed it open. The model unit was staged to look like someone lived there. Pale gray furniture. Pendant lights over a kitchen island that had never been cooked in. A floor-to-ceiling window looking out over Sandy Springs. The afternoon sun cutting sideways through it and landing in a long, bright stripe across the floor. Patricia was standing near the window. She saw him first. The color left her face so fast it was like watching a switch flip. Her mouth opened, and nothing came out. Her hand, which had been resting on the kitchen counter, dropped to her side, like it suddenly weighed too much. Brett Calloway was standing between the island and the living area, closer to the door. He was bigger than his photos, thick through the chest, red-faced in the way of men who spent time outdoors doing things that weren't exercise. He wore a collared shirt, with the sleeves rolled up, and the particular posture of a man who had never once considered that the energy in a room might not bend toward him. He looked at Darius. Then he stepped forward. "This is private property," he said. His voice was loud, louder than it needed to be, the way voices got when they were trying to do the work that confidence was supposed to do. "You need to turn yourself around." Darius didn't stop walking. Brett's right hand moved under his jacket. And then there was a .45 caliber pistol pointing at Darius's chest. I said, "Don't move." The room went completely still. And then Darius laughed. It wasn't a short laugh or a nervous one. It came up from somewhere low and real, warm and unhurried. The laugh of a man who has just received news he was already expecting, but finds genuinely funny anyway. It filled the staged, paint-smelling room and bounced off the gray furniture and went all the way to the window where Patricia was standing with her hand still at her side. Brett's jaw tightened. I said, "I heard you." Darius was still walking. Not fast, not charging. Just walking, the same way he'd come down the hallway, the same way he'd come up the stairs. Your fingers on the trigger. That's how accidents happen. Brett's eyes dropped. Not all the way, just a fraction. Just the small, involuntary glance of a man whose attention had been redirected by the thing he was least expecting to hear. That fraction of a second was exactly enough. Darius's left hand came up and across, not grabbing, redirecting, steering the barrel upward and outward in one smooth motion, away from anything with a person behind it. His right hand found Brett's wrist at the same moment, and he applied the specific leverage that didn't require strength, just geometry, and the precise understanding of where a joint was not designed to bend. Brett made a sound, short and sharp, not quite a word. The gun came free. Darius stepped back. The whole thing took about 2 seconds. He dropped the magazine out of the grip. It hit the carpet. He racked the slide, and the chambered round tumbled out after it, landing near the baseboard. Then he set the disarmed pistol on the kitchen counter, gently, without drama, the way you set down a glass you're done with. Brett was cradling his wrist against his chest. His face had gone a different kind of red. His breathing was loud, and his eyes were moving in the unfocused way of a man whose body was trying to understand what had just happened while his brain was still 2 seconds behind. Patricia had not moved. Her hand was over her mouth now. Darius looked at Brett. 12 years, he said. Naval Special Warfare. He let it sit there for a moment, plain and uncomplicated. You pulled a gun on the wrong man. Then he turned to Patricia. He looked at her for a moment, not with rage, not with the shaking, wet-eyed grief of a man coming apart. He looked at her the way you look at something you've just understood completely. Finished, resolved, a question that no longer needs asking because you already have the answer. Her eyes were filling. She started to say his name. He turned and walked out. In the elevator going down, alone, his face changed, just for a moment. Something moved across it that wasn't strategy and wasn't discipline. Something private and heavy and very old. He let it be there for the length of 1 floor. Then the doors opened. He crossed the lobby. He pushed through the side door into the afternoon. He sat in his truck for a moment. Then he picked up his phone. "Dot," he said when she answered, "I need to come see you." She was on the porch when he pulled up. That was Dot. She didn't ask questions over the phone, didn't make you explain yourself twice. She heard what she needed to hear in the spaces between words, and then she was ready when you arrived. A glass of sweet tea sat on the small table beside her chair, already poured. Another one sat across from it. Darius climbed the porch steps and sat down. Dot looked at him, really looked, the way she always had, the way that made him feel 12 years old and 41 at the same time. She didn't say anything yet. She picked up her glass and waited. He talked for a long time. He told her about the second phone, about the screen still lit on the kitchen counter, the two messages, the way he'd read them and set the phone back down exactly as he found it. He told her about the name, Brett Calloway, and about the 4 consecutive trips Patricia had made to Sandy Springs. He told her about the model unit, about the gun, about the 2 seconds it took, about Patricia's face when the color drained out of it. Dot listened to all of it without a word. No sharp intake of breath, no hand over her heart. She just sat there in the warm East Point evening with her tea and her steady eyes, taking it in the way a person takes in something they are already turning into information. When he finished, the porch was quiet. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something. A car passed. Then Dot set her glass down. "How much do you already know?" she said. It wasn't the question he expected. Not, "Are you okay?" or "What are you going to do?" Just that. "Enough to know there's more," he said. She nodded slowly. "Say the parts that bothered you most. Not the gun. Not the affair. The messages." He told her again. The account. The instruction to keep him calm through Q3. Dot leaned forward. Her elbows went to her knees, and her eyes sharpened in a way he recognized. The paralegal look, the one that meant she was sorting, filing, building a structure out of loose information. "Baby," she said, "that woman is not just cheating on you." She said it quietly, not cruelly, just plainly, the way she said things that needed to be heard without softening. The affair is real, but it's not the point. She tapped one finger against her knee. You don't tell somebody to keep a person calm through Q3 unless there's a timeline, unless something is happening that needs time to finish. You understand what I'm saying? Darius understood. "She's coordinating something," Dot said. "She and that man are working on something together, and your marriage is the cover for it while they do." She sat back. "The question is what? And you find that out before you do a single other thing. Every last piece. You don't move until you have the full picture." She pointed a finger at him. "One move. You make it count." He looked at her. 67 years old, 5'4", retired for 6 years, and she was still the sharpest person he knew in any room. He had understood this about her since childhood. It was why he had called her from the truck, and not anyone else. "I have someone who can help with the financial side," he said. "Kevin." "Yes." Dot nodded once. "Then call him tonight." She reached over and put her hand on his arm for just a moment. Not a soft gesture, a grounding one. And then she picked up her tea, like the conversation had moved into its next phase. He made the call from the driveway, sitting with the window down and the engine off. Kevin picked up on the second ring. "Clear your weekend," Darius said. "I need to walk you through everything." A pause. Kevin did not ask what it was about or why. That wasn't how he operated. "How bad?" he said. "We're still finding out." Another pause. Then, "I'll be ready." Darius ended the call. He sat there another minute in the warm dark, looking at nothing. Then he backed out of Dot's driveway and pointed the truck toward home. The house was quiet when he got in. The kitchen light was on, the way Patricia always left it. There were dishes in the drying rack. She had cooked something and cleaned up and gone to bed. A normal evening by every visible measure. He moved through the house without turning on any other lights, checked the doors out of habit, set his keys on the hook. She was asleep when he came into the bedroom. On her side, facing away, her breathing slow, and the room smelled like her lotion, a scent he had spent 8 years going to sleep next to. He got into bed. He did not wake her. He lay on his back in the dark with his eyes open, and his hands still at his sides, his breathing controlled, his body completely at rest. On the surface, he looked like a man sleeping. He was not sleeping. He was already inside the operation. Kevin Osei's home office looked like the inside of a mind that never stopped working. 2 monitors, a whiteboard covered in red and black marker, File folders lined up on a shelf with the precision of a man who considered disorganization a form of failure. The room smelled like coffee and printer ink. There was one chair for guests. Kevin had already set it out before Darius knocked. Darius laid everything on the desk. The printed phone records from Patricia's second number. The name of the Shell LLC, Hollis Property Solutions, LLC, copied from the messages in his own handwriting. Brett Calloway's publicly available business filings, printed from the Georgia Secretary of State's website the night before. Kevin looked at it all without touching any of it first. He just looked, read from a distance, the way a man reads a room before he enters it. Then he sat down, rolled his chair forward, and got to work. Darius did not hover. He poured himself coffee from the pot on the side table and sat in the guest chair and let Kevin operate. That was the arrangement between them, always. Darius brought the problem. Kevin took it apart. Asking questions while Kevin worked was like talking during surgery, technically possible, but not something either of them would do. The first hour was quiet except for the sound of typing and the occasional scratch of a marker on the whiteboard. Kevin pulled Patricia's second phone activity and cross-referenced it against a separate window. Washington Tactical Group's business account records, pulled from the firm's internal system. He was looking for overlap, dates, amounts, patterns. He found the pattern inside 90 minutes. He didn't announce it. He just picked up a red marker and wrote a number on the whiteboard. $118,000. Then he sat back and let Darius read it. Over 26 months, Kevin said. His voice was even, professional. Small increments, 1,200 here, 3,000 there. Nothing that would trip an automatic flag. Moved out of the business account Patricia co-signed during the refinance 3 years ago. He tapped the whiteboard. Routed into Hollis Property Solutions. He pulled up a second screen. I traced Hollis through 2 layers of paperwork. Parent company is Calloway Development Partners. He looked at Darius. Brett Calloway's holding company. The room was very quiet. Darius looked at the number on the whiteboard. $118,000. 26 months. Small enough increments to stay invisible. Large enough, accumulated, to matter. He thought about the refinance. He remembered signing those papers at the kitchen table. He remembered Patricia beside him, already knowing what she would eventually do with the access he was giving her. He did not look away from the whiteboard for a long moment. Then he set his coffee down. She wasn't just sleeping with him, Darius said. Not a question. No, Kevin said. She was his instrument. She had access to your business account, and she used it. Brett Calloway has been pulling equity out of Washington Tactical Group for over 2 years, and your wife is how he got in. Kevin said it without inflection. Not cruel, not gentle, just true, the way facts are true, without regard for how they land. Darius absorbed it. His face did not change. His hands were still. He was the same man who had sat in his truck outside a Sandy Springs condo building and decided to walk in. The same man who had held his breathing steady while another man pointed a gun at his chest. The wound was there. It was deep, and it was real. But he did not let it come up to the surface. Not here. Not yet. Kevin waited. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Darius was quiet for a moment. Then he asked one question. "Tell me everything about Judith Calloway." Kevin's expression shifted, just slightly. Not surprise, something closer to recognition. He turned back to his monitors. He pulled Brett Calloway's personal records. Marriage certificate filed in Fulton County, 2001. Judith Ann Calloway, née Frazier, 51 years old. Her family name was attached to 3 commercial properties in Buckhead and a land trust in Cobb County that predated her marriage to Brett by 20 years. Old Atlanta money. The quiet, established kind. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. "She's been married to him for 23 years, Kevin said, reading as he went. "No prior divorce filings, No public legal disputes. He scrolled. But he stopped. She retained a private financial consultant 18 months ago, paid through a personal account, not a joint one. He leaned toward the screen. That's not something you do unless you're looking at something you don't want your husband to see. He glanced back at Darius. She's been suspicious, Kevin said. Privately, for a while. Darius nodded once. He looked at the whiteboard, at the number in red, at the name of the shell company, and the chain of ownership Kevin had sketched out in black marker beside it. He filed the information about Judith Calloway away carefully, the way he filed everything, precisely, in its proper place. Then he stood up, picked up his copy of the documents, and straightened them against the desk. He left Kevin's office with a full picture of what had been taken from him and the beginning of a plan that was larger than divorce. The house smelled like jerk chicken when Darius pulled into the driveway. He sat in the truck for a moment, just long enough to register. Patricia knew exactly what that smell did to him. She had known since their second year of marriage, when she first made it on a rainy Sunday and watched him eat 2 full plates without saying a word, which for Darius was the highest form of praise. She was using it now. He got out of the truck and went inside. The kitchen was warm and bright. Patricia was at the stove in the yellow apron she wore when she wanted to look domestic, stirring rice with one hand and checking her phone with the other. She looked up when he came through the door, and her whole face opened up. That wide, practiced smile that had convinced him for 8 years that he was the thing she wanted most. "Hey, baby." She set the spoon down and crossed to him, kissed his cheek, squeezed his arm. "You were gone all morning. I was starting to miss you." "Had some things to handle," Darius said. She went back to the stove. "Sit down. It's almost ready." He sat. He watched her move around the kitchen, confident, unhurried, playing a version of wife that she had clearly rehearsed. The rice, the chicken, the way she glanced back at him twice to make sure he was watching. She was performing, and she was good at it. He could see the seams now, but only because he knew where to look. He ate. He told her the chicken was good. She beamed. The days that followed had a rhythm to them. Patricia cooked 3 more times that week. She initiated small touches, a hand on his shoulder when she passed, her fingers finding his while they watched television in the evenings. She asked about his work with an interest she had not shown in years. She laughed easily. She was warm in the way of a woman who had made a decision and was managing its aftermath. She believed the gun had done it. That was the thing. She believed Brett pointing a .45 at her husband's chest had broken something in Darius, his confidence, his pride, his will to push back. His silence since that day, she had decided, was the silence of a man who had been frightened into retreat and was now quietly licking his wounds. She had no other frame for it, because she had never actually understood what her husband was. Darius received all of it, the meals, the warmth, the performance of a happy marriage. He received it the same way he received everything now, patiently, observantly, without showing a single card. It was on the 4th evening that he asked the question. They were cleaning up after dinner. Patricia was rinsing dishes. Darius was drying. The kitchen was quiet and ordinary, the kind of moment that in a different life would have been easy. "Hey," he said, casual as weather. "Did that automatic transfer from the secondary business account ever post? I meant to check it and forgot." Patricia didn't stop rinsing. Her hands didn't slow. Her shoulders didn't tighten. "Yeah, I think so," she said. "I saw something come through last week. Looked normal to me." "Okay," he said. "Good." That was all. He finished drying the plate in his hands and set it in the cabinet. His face was completely neutral. His breathing was even, but he had heard everything he needed to hear. Not just the lie, though the lie was there, smooth and immediate, shaped by years of quiet practice. What he heard beneath it was the ease of it. There was no hesitation, no slight pause while she figured out what to say. No micro-expression of guilt crossing her face. She lied to him the way most people tell the truth, automatically, without cost, without any awareness of the weight of what she was doing. She had been doing this for a long time, not months, years. He thought about that as he folded the dish towel and set it on the counter. He thought about how many conversations they'd had in this kitchen, how many quiet evenings that had felt like peace but were something else, how many times he had taken her word for something and never once thought to question it, because he was the kind of man who did not assume the people he loved were working against him. She had known that about him. She had counted on it. He said goodnight at 10 o'clock. She kissed him and said she'd be up soon. He went to the home office and closed the door softly behind him. 40 minutes later, his laptop screen showed the exchange Kevin's monitoring had flagged on Patricia's second line. "He's coming around," she'd sent. Brett's reply came back in under 2 minutes. "You handled it perfectly." Darius read both messages once. Then he picked up his phone and called Aunt Dot. She answered on the second ring. "How are you holding up?" she asked. He leaned back in his chair, looked at the ceiling for a moment. "She's not a stranger anymore," he said. "That's the part that helps." Dot was quiet on the other end. Then, "Good. Use it." "I am," he said. He hung up and turned back to his desk. He opened a blank document on his laptop. At the top, he typed a single line as a header, then began to write. Every party, every document, every step, in the exact sequence that would make it impossible for any of them to get ahead of what was coming. The call came at 7:14 in the morning. Darius was already awake, had been since 5, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the quiet that came before Patricia stirred. He picked up on the first ring. "You need to come in," Kevin said. "No greeting, no preamble, just that." Darius set down his mug. "How soon?" "Now." Kevin's home office looked like it always did when he was deep in something. Multiple screens lit, papers arranged in tight columns, the wastepaper basket full of printed pages he'd already moved past. He was standing when Darius arrived, which was unusual. Kevin was a man who sat when he worked. Standing meant he hadn't been able to sit. He pointed at a document on the center screen without saying anything first. Darius leaned in and read it. It was a power of attorney filing. 14 months old, signed in Darius Washington's name, granting Patricia Washington authority to execute financial and legal agreements on behalf of her spouse in matters related to the business entity listed at the top of the page. The business entity was Patricia's spa. Darius straightened up slowly. "That's not my signature," he said. "No," Kevin said. "It is not." He pulled up a second window, then a third. Side by side, 3 different documents Darius had legitimately signed over the years, pulled from their business records. The signatures were close, practiced. Someone had spent real time studying how he wrote his name, but they weren't his. Kevin said, "Brett's development company has a silent financial stake in the spa. Filed quietly through a subsidiary LLC. Different name, different registered agent. Traces back to him through 2 transfers. It was set up the same month the POA was filed." He paused. The spa Darius Washington, seeded with $60,000 and personally guaranteed, is now partially collateralized by the man sleeping with his wife. The room was very quiet. Darius turned away from the screen and looked at the wall for a moment. Not because he needed to think. He was already thinking, cleanly and fast. He turned away because he needed 1 second that wasn't facing a screen full of evidence of how completely he had been used. He took that second. Then he turned back. "The texts," he said. Kevin pulled them up. They were on Patricia's second phone records, the same line that had already yielded the $118,000 trail. Brett's messages to Patricia, 14 months ago, read like a tutorial. Step by step. Sign here. Use this language. File it with this office. Don't mention it to anyone. Patient, deliberate, specific. The messages of a man who had done this kind of thing before and was confident he would not be caught doing it again. Patricia had followed every instruction. Darius read through the thread once, all the way to the end. Then he said, "Get me the name of a forensic accountant. Someone with no connection to Patricia, no connection to Buckhead, no connection to anything she's ever touched." "Already have 2 candidates," Kevin said. "Pick the better one." Darius straightened. "And I need an attorney. Civil litigation and criminal referral capacity. Same requirement. No overlap with her world. No shared contacts. I'll have both by end of day." Darius nodded once. "Build me the full package. Every transfer, every LLC filing, the POA, the directing texts. I want it in order. I want it airtight." Kevin looked at him steadily. "It'll be airtight." He drove to Aunt Dot's that afternoon. She was at her kitchen table when he arrived, reading glasses on, a cup of tea at her elbow. He set Kevin's documentation package in front of her, printed, tabbed, in order, and sat across from her without saying anything. She picked it up and began to read. She did not rush. She turned each page the way she had turned 10,000 pages over 30 years as a paralegal, carefully, with full attention, occasionally going back to cross-reference something she'd flagged. Darius drank his tea and waited. 20 minutes passed. Dot set the last page down and removed her glasses. "The POA filing," she said. "It was notarized." "Yes, which means someone in a notary office either didn't verify identity or was paid not to." She tapped the page. "That's a second criminal exposure point. Your attorney will want to flag it separately from the forgery itself." Darius pulled out a small notepad and wrote it down. Dot leaned back in her chair. She looked at the stack of documents for a long moment, and something moved across her face. Not surprise, not even anger. Something older and quieter than both. Then it settled, and she was sharp again. "Here's how this goes," she said. "Beverly and Roy find out at the same time Patricia does. Not before. Because if they find out first, Patricia gets a warning call. Not after, because then she's had time to build a story." Dot's voice was even and precise. "Everyone learns it in the same room, at the same moment, from you. That way there's nothing to retract and nowhere to run." Darius wrote that down too. They went through the rest of the sequence together. The attorney, the forensic accountant, the filing order, the timing. Dot asked 3 more questions, each one catching something Darius had not yet fully mapped. He answered them. She refined the plan. When they were done, he gathered the documents and returned them to the folder. He drove home. Patricia's car was in the driveway. The lights were on in the kitchen. He went inside, greeted her, and after dinner he picked up his phone and typed, "Can you clear Saturday? I'd like to have your parents over for dinner." Her reply came back in 4 minutes. "Yes! That sounds so good, baby. I'll call Mama tonight. I'm really glad you said that." He read it once, set the phone face down on the desk, and went to bed. Beverly and Roy Holloway arrived at 6 o'clock exactly. Beverly was the kind of woman who was never late. She considered it a form of respect, and she extended that courtesy even to casual dinners. She came through the front door in a burgundy dress, Roy behind her in a collared shirt and slacks, both of them carrying the particular energy of people who had been told things were getting better and wanted to believe it. "Something smells wonderful," Beverly said, pulling Darius into a hug. She was warm the way Patricia was warm, practiced, deliberate, genuine enough that you didn't question it until you had a reason to. Roy shook Darius's hand, firm. He was a quiet man, a retired high school principal, and he had always respected Darius in the way of men who recognize steadiness in others. "Good to see you, son." "Good to see you both," Darius said. "Come on in. Dinner's almost ready." The table was set properly. 4 places, then a 5th that Darius added without comment. The food was already on the stove. Smothered pork chops, rice, collard greens. He had been cooking since 2 in the afternoon. Patricia had floated in and out of the kitchen all day, tasting things, touching his arm, telling him the greens smelled exactly right. She was dressed nicely. Her hair was done. She had been glowing all day with the particular relief of a woman who believed the worst was behind her. She was in the living room with her mother when the knock came at the door. Darius answered it. Aunt Dot stood on the porch in her good coat, reading glasses folded in her breast pocket, a sweet potato pie in both hands. "Evening?" she said. "Evening, Dot." He took the pie and stepped aside. Patricia appeared in the hallway. She went still. It was not a dramatic stillness. Nothing that Beverly or Roy, coming in from the living room, would have catalogued as significant, but Darius saw it. The half-second delay before her face rearranged itself into something welcoming, the quick recalculation behind her eyes. "Aunt Dot," she said, "I didn't know you were coming. Darius invited me." Dot handed her coat to no one in particular and walked toward the dining room like she had been there 100 times, because she had. "Beverly, you look well." Beverly smiled. "Dorothy, it's been too long." They sat down to dinner. All 5 of them. The food was good. Darius had made sure of that. Conversation moved the way it does at family tables, easy and unhurried, landing on Roy's garden, on Beverly's church choir, on the weather. Patricia relaxed by degrees. She laughed at something Roy said. She refilled Beverly's water glass without being asked. Darius let it go on until the plates were mostly cleared. Then he stood, walked to the kitchen counter, and returned with a manila folder. He set it in the center of the table. No flourish, no announcement. The way a man sets down a finished report. Because the work is done, and what's inside speaks for itself. Everyone looked at it. Beverly's smile softened into something uncertain. Roy set down his fork. Darius sat back down and folded his hands. "Beverly." "Roy." His voice was quiet and even. "I asked you here tonight because you deserve to hear this directly from me. Not in a phone call later, not through Patricia's version of it. From me at this table." Patricia said, "Darius, the affair started 26 months ago. He said it the way you read a date off a calendar. His name is Brett Calloway, real estate developer out of Sandy Springs. Patricia has been meeting him regularly since then. I confirmed it myself." Beverly's hand moved slowly off the table and into her lap. "Over those same 26 months, Darius continued, $118,000 was moved out of a Washington Tactical Group account that Patricia co-signed during a business refinance, moved in small amounts into a shell LLC. That LLC traces back to Brett Calloway's holding company." He opened the folder and slid the first document toward the center of the table. "That's the transfer record. Kevin Ossie, my business partner, former Army intelligence, compiled it." Roy leaned forward. He looked at the page. He did not pick up his fork again. Patricia said, "Those numbers aren't what they look like." Darius slid a second document across. 14 months ago, Brett Calloway's development company filed a silent financial interest in Patricia's spa. "My spa. The one I seeded with $60,000 and personally guaranteed." He paused. "The filing used a power of attorney signed in my name. I did not sign it." Beverly looked up from the document. "She forged his name on legal documents, Beverly." Dot's voice was the only other voice in the room that had spoken in the last 2 minutes. She did not raise it. She looked at Beverly directly. The way one woman looks at another when there is no point in softening the thing that needs to be said. That's not a marriage in trouble. That's a crime against the man who built everything in this house. The silence that followed was complete. Patricia's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at the folder, at her mother's face, at Roy's hands flat and still on the table beside a fork he hadn't touched. She looked at Darius. There was nothing left to say that the documents hadn't already answered. Brett Calloway slept well on Sunday night. That was the thing nobody would believe later, that he went to bed without worry, poured himself 2 fingers of Blanton's, watched an hour of television, and slept like a man with nothing pressing on him. He had texted Patricia twice over the weekend and gotten nothing back, but that wasn't unusual. Sometimes she went quiet for a day or two. It was part of managing the situation. He understood that. He woke at 7:30, showered, put on a charcoal blazer over a white Oxford because he had a sight walk at 11 in Alpharetta, made coffee in the kitchen of the Sandy Springs condo he kept for work, or that was what he told people it was for, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling window watching the morning traffic stack up on 400 below. He was feeling good. The Dunwoody project had cleared its final permit. A new investor had come in on the Brookhaven build. Things were moving. His phone rang at 8:52. It was Gerald, his attorney. Brett set down his coffee. Gerald did not call before 9 unless something required it. "Gerald, what's up?" "Brett, I need you to sit down." "I'm standing." "Talk to me." Gerald's voice had the particular flatness of a man choosing his words the way you choose your steps crossing ice. "A forensic accounting complaint," he said, "filed Friday afternoon with the Georgia Secretary of State's office. It named Brett's holding company directly. Fraudulent asset transfer. Forged documentation." And attached to the complaint, this was the part where Gerald's voice dropped even further, were printed text message records. "What text messages?" Brett said. Gerald read him 2 of them. Brett recognized them immediately, word for word. His own words, sent from his own phone 14 months ago, walking Patricia through the power of attorney filing step by step. He set his coffee cup down on the counter very carefully. "Who filed it?" he said. "The complainant is listed as Washington Tactical Group, LLC. Gerald paused. "Brett, who is Darius Washington?" Brett didn't answer that. He was still standing at the window when the lobby called up at 9:24 to say there was an attorney in the building asking for him by name. Not Gerald. Someone he had never heard of. He told the lobby to send her up. She was a woman in her mid-50s, dark suit, leather briefcase, the particular composure of someone who has delivered bad news so many times it no longer affects her posture. She introduced herself as counsel for Judith Calloway. Brett went cold in a way the morning coffee hadn't prepared him for. She didn't sit down. She didn't ask him to sit down either. She handed him an envelope and stood quietly while he opened it. Judith had filed for divorce. Friday morning, before the Secretary of State complaint, he registered numbly, which meant 2 separate things had been filed on the same day, from 2 different directions, and neither of them had anything to do with the other. The filing included a fraudulent transfer claim. Judith's own forensic accountant, the letter noted, had been working for 2 weeks. The claim was comprehensive. All joint and business accounts were frozen effective that morning. The filing sought the primary residence in Buckhead, the lake property in Rabun County, and all documented liquid assets. "Mrs. Calloway has no interest in communicating directly," the attorney said. "If you have questions, direct them to me." She left a card on the kitchen counter and showed herself out. Brett stood in the middle of the condo, the document in his hand. The window behind him. Atlanta 30 floors below, going about its morning like none of this was happening. He called Patricia. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He texted her. "Call me. Now. It's bad." The 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then nothing. The knock at the door came at 9:47. A courier in a polo shirt, clipboard, padded envelope. Brett signed for it without thinking. He closed the door and looked at the return address. No company name, just a name. D. Washington. He opened it. 1 sheet of paper. Personal letterhead. Clean, minimal. The kind a professional man uses when he wants to make sure the document looks like what it is. 3 sentences, printed in plain black type. The gun didn't work. Neither will anything else. I suggest you contact a criminal attorney before noon. Brett read it twice, then a 3rd time. He called Patricia again. Nothing. He stood in the kitchen of his Sandy Springs condo for a long moment. Then, without entirely knowing why, he walked down the hall and took the stairs to the 4th floor and let himself into the model unit with his passkey. The room was exactly as it had always been. Staged furniture, clean lines, a kitchen counter where a disarmed .45 had once sat beside a dropped magazine, and a single brass round on the carpet. Brett stood in the middle of the room. He thought about the laugh. He had told himself, in the days after, that it was a bluff, that it was the kind of noise a man makes when he is scared and trying not to show it. He had told himself that, because the alternative, he understood now. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't fear dressed up as something else. It was the sound of a man who had walked into this room already knowing how it would end. A man who had been handed the opening move of a game he had already finished. Brett Calloway stood alone in the model unit and stared at the kitchen counter, and understood, completely, what that laugh had meant. The law moved the way Darius always knew it would. Not fast, but sure. His attorney filed the criminal referral the Monday after the Secretary of State complaint. The DA's office picked it up within a week. The text messages did most of the work. Brett had been thorough in his directions to Patricia, sending step-by-step instructions with the confidence of a man who never considered anyone would read them. That thoroughness became the case. A prosecutor does not need to build a story when the defendant has already written it out in his own words. Brett's attorney spent 3 weeks trying to negotiate the conspiracy charge down to a civil matter. The DA declined twice. On the 4th week, Brett pleaded no contest. 12 months of house arrest, 5 years of probation, full financial restitution to Washington Tactical Group, ordered by the court and documented to the dollar, and a permanent bar from holding any officer or director position in any business entity registered in the state of Georgia. Darius was not in the courtroom. He had no reason to be. His attorney sent him a text when it was done. He read it at his desk, set the phone face down, and went back to the proposal he was drafting for a new federal contract. The development projects came apart on their own schedule, the way badly built things always do. 2 contracted builds defaulted within 60 days of the accounts being frozen. Subcontractors filed liens. The properties entered receivership. Brett's financial partners, men who had tolerated his personality for years because his money made it worthwhile, withdrew quietly and did not explain themselves. One sent a brief email. The others simply stopped responding to calls. The Atlanta Business Chronicle ran the court filing in its weekly legal notices column. 4 sentences. Brett Calloway's name, his company, the charge, the sentence. No photograph, no analysis, just the record, printed in small type on page 12, where the people who needed to see it would see it. His country club membership came up for its annual renewal that November. It was not renewed. Nobody made a call about it. Nobody needed to. These things have their own gravity in certain parts of Atlanta. Judith took the Buckhead house and the lake property in Rabun County. Her forensic accountant had been thorough. The settlement reflected it. Brett moved into a corporate extended stay hotel in Dunwoody, a clean, beige, completely anonymous building off I-285 where the hallways smelled like carpet cleaner and nobody asked questions about your situation. His room had a small refrigerator and a window that faced the parking deck. He was 44 years old. He still had the wrist. On cold mornings it ached in a specific way, deep in the joint, where the leverage had been applied. He thought about the laugh more than he thought about anything else from that day. Patricia's attorney was direct with her. Contesting the divorce meant appearing in civil proceedings. Civil proceedings meant the full fraud record, transfers, LLC filings, the forged POA, every directing text message became part of the public file, accessible, searchable, her name on all of it, permanently. She signed the papers uncontested on a Thursday afternoon in October. Her attorney walked her out of the building, and that was the end of it. The spa was padlocked within the week. It was a marital asset and an instrument of fraud, and the court treated it as both. The Buckhead storefront sat dark, the blinds drawn, a notice taped inside the glass. The neighbors on either side went about their business. Nobody on that block had known her well enough to ask questions. She found a one-bedroom apartment in Decatur, second floor, with a window that got morning light. She found a job at a skincare spa in Marietta. Not her own place, not her own name on the door, just her hands and her license and her hours. She was good at the work. She had always been good at the work. She did not contact Brett Calloway again. She did not try. 14 months after the folder hit the dinner table, Washington Tactical Group was larger than it had been before any of it happened. The civil judgment had recovered the full $118,000, plus court costs. Kevin had taken the experience, the vulnerability, the documentation gap, the slow bleed through a trusted co-signer, and built it into something, a financial safeguard architecture for small businesses, quarterly audit protocols, tiered account controls, access logs with automatic flags. He had packaged it cleanly, and 3 clients had already signed on for it. 2 more were in conversation. "Turn the wound into the product," Kevin had said, and Darius had looked at him for a moment and then nodded. Because that was exactly right. Darius had sold the Cascade Heights house in the spring. He held no particular grief about it. It was square footage he had never needed, in a version of his life that no longer existed. He bought a smaller place in Vine City. Proper garage. A backyard that was manageable. He had built the deck himself over 3 weekends in June, measuring twice, cutting once, doing it the way he did everything. On a Sunday evening in late July, Darius sat on the deck he had built. The air was warm and still. Kevin sat nearby, a beer loose in his hand, not talking about anything in particular. From inside the house came the sounds of Aunt Dot in the kitchen. Cabinet doors, a pot, the low hum of a woman who expressed love through the act of feeding people, the smell of something good drifting out through the screen door. Kevin looked over at him. "You good?" Darius was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the yard, not toward anything he was still reaching for. Just out. Even. Present. "Yeah," he said. "I'm good." He meant it. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.